Dr. Angela Puca is an independent religious studies scholar and university lecturer. She bridges the gap between academia and the general public with her social media project, Angela's Symposium, where she disseminates peer reviewed research to a wider audience. On this episode, she joins me to discuss her co edited book with Dr. Suzanne Owen titled Pagan Religions in 5 Minutes. Dr. Angela Puca, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Greg.
I'm delighted that you're here. I'm wondering if we can kick this off by having you introduce yourself to the listeners out there just a little bit so they know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes. So I'm Dr. Angela Puca, and I have a PhD in religious studies at the University of Leeds, a bachelor's and a master's in philosophy, PGCHE, which for people outside of the UK, it's a professional qualification to teach in universities. And sometimes I describe myself as a digital academic because through my academic career, I started to disseminate academic scholarship online on my social media called Angela Symposium. So that project grew quite significantly. So now I feel like I'm both working within the university system and in the public outreach sphere on social media. So my main projects are these two. I mean, working in universities, doing my academic research, and working for Angela Symposium to deliver academic scholarship to a wider public.
Awesome. I love that you're committed to being out in the world, like beyond universities and colleges as well. I've done a ton of work in that as well, and that's kind of one of my own personal inspirations too. Tell me a little bit more about that project that is more public facing. Tell me a little bit more about that. That sounds really cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've just reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and across my platforms, I have over 150,000 followers. So it started, I'd say that YouTube is my main platform, but I'm also on all the other social media platforms and TikTok as well, which also has a significant following. My idea was to disseminate in a way that it's easy to understand peer-reviewed scholarship, so the research that we do in academia, specifically about topics such as paganism, esotericism, magic, because those are my main research interests, shamanism, and so on. So the idea was that I noticed, given that I do field work for my research, I noticed that practitioners don't have much access or knowledge to what happens in academic circles. And so there is a bit of a mismatch between what happens in terms of discourse within academic circles regarding a specific topic and what happens within the community of practitioners who don't have access to that kind of information. And so I don't know, I just felt like it's a bit our responsibility as academics to go beyond the ivory tower and to allow for our work to have a wider outreach. And so I use the means of social media to achieve that.
Awesome. That sounds really, really great. I'd love to know a little bit about your academic background as far as like getting involved in religion and pagan religions in general. How did you become interested in this topic that you have gone down this academic path of leading to the book that we're about to discuss? Tell me about that story of finding your academic way.
Finding my academic way. So, when I was in Italy, because I'm originally from Italy and now I'm based in the UK, and my bachelor's and master's were in Italy. Originally, I didn't think that it was even possible to study paganism from an academic point of view, because when I did my bachelor's and master's, there was really nobody doing, and there is still hardly anybody doing this kind of research in Italy. Although, luckily now things are starting slowly to change. So that wasn't even an option for me to consider. And at first, I was moving towards Buddhist studies. I studied Sanskrit and Tibetan, and that was my path originally. And then thanks to a YouTube video that I watched, which featured a friend and colleague, Dr. Jenny Butler, who was talking about her PhD research in Irish paganism. And that was a bit of a epiphany for me because I realized that it was indeed possible to research paganism from an academic point of view. And that's one of the key moments that led me to apply for a PhD abroad, as in the UK, and start to study paganism and shamanism. So what led me to study these religious movements is the fact that I find them endlessly fascinating. I
Mm,
think that the fact that they are growing religious movements and the fact that they seem to respond to certain needs that the modern person has, and perhaps respond to needs that at least those who belong to these groups feel like other religions, perhaps more popular religions, don't manage to respond to those needs. So I just found it fascinating. I also find it fascinating that paganism is or pagan religions, to use it in the plural, are religions that are very focused on the earth, on nature, on the idea that the divine is immanent, is not something that is out there, transcendent, and you have to wait until you die to reconvene with the divine. So there isn't the concept that the divine is outside there, has created the world and stays outside of it. No, everything is imbued with the divine. So this immanent perception of the divine, and also the fact that it's represented both in the female and the male aspect as the two main polarities, which are not necessarily gendered. I mean, they are gendered in a symbolic way, but not in a fixed, essentialist way.
gotcha.
And
Well, yeah, go ahead.
no, 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 go on.
So you have a new book out. Your co-editor is Dr. Suzanne Owen from Leeds Trinity University. Dr. Owen researches British Druidry and indigeneity in Newfoundland. How did you two become collaborators along the way?
Oh, Susan Owen was my PhD supervisor, and now we are colleagues. We both teach at Leeds Trinity University. So that's, and we are both interested and researchers of paganism. So that's why we collaborated. She was the one who was invited first to create this book, which is part of a wider collection of Religion in 5 Minutes, which is edited by Russell McCutcheon. And
Hmm.
so she was invited to create a book, this kind of book, and then she asked me to participate in the editing process. So that's how we got to work on it, pretty much.
Wonderful. Well, I know that you two, in the preface or in the introduction chapter, talks about there was like an event that like, you two were planning on doing in 2020 when the world changed so drastically. Tell me what you two had planned and then how it morphed into a book.
So we planned for an event at Leeds Trinity University called "Everything You Want to Ask About Paganism, but We're Afraid to Ask." So it was something that was open to students and pretty much everybody that wanted to join in and just ask questions about paganism, so that we could collect the questions that people may have about the topic. But obviously, due to the pandemic and what happened, it didn't happen in person; it happened online, and that helped us to gather some of the questions. But I have to say that also my patron community, because via my online project I also have a patron community, helped significantly in finding those questions. That's why there's also an acknowledgement in the book about for my patron community, because there's one patron in particular that gathered the different questions that were being asked on different social media forums, on different online platforms and social media, and he gathered which were the most common, the common the most trending questions that people were asking or wondering about. And also we had another event for with my patron community that also helped us to gather more questions. So it was a bit multi-faceted, and so we gathered question via that online event and also via my patron community, and Andrew in particular that helped to gather many of the questions that were being asked online on different social media platforms.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to the book. Um, Pagan Religions in 5 Minutes, as you mentioned, is a series edited by Russell McCutcheon, whose work I've been following for several years at this point. So I want to get into just it's a simple, but it's not a simple question. To you and Dr. Owen, what is paganism? If you could just kind of boil it down for the general listener out there, how would you introduce this concept in general?
So what is paganism? So paganism, I would say, is an umbrella term that describes a series of religious movements that have a few things in common. One thing is the immanent view of the divine, which I was mentioning before. Also, there's an earth-centered dimension to it. In the past, it used to be called earth worshipping. So, because there are some pagan traditions that tend to be earth worshipping, but others are more earth centered in that nature and the cycles of nature have a primary importance in their worldview, in their belief system, and in their ritualistic practices. Also, there's a perception that the divine is both female and male and everything in between and beyond. So there's a perception not of the divine that is solely masculine, as you can find in other religions, and also there's the concept that there isn't a fixed ethics where there's some kind of divine reward or punishment depending on what you do. There's more the concept of the individual responsibility when it comes to ethics. And pagans tend to not see something as inherently good or evil or work within these binaries, but more evaluate things depending on the effect that it has on others, on the environment, on the community, whether something is harmful to others or not, as opposed to thinking this thing is intrinsically immoral or intrinsically evil. So it
Mm.
tends to be more an ethic that is more individual and evaluated based on the context.
Yeah, I really enjoyed where you wrote about the personal growth and discovery aspect, the freedom aspect, the creativity aspect, and the autonomy behind it. That was a really captivating bit of detail for me as a reader as well.
Thank you.
Did
Is
you, what about animism and polytheism? How does that stuff fit in?
Animism and polytheism are definitely specific belief systems that belong to the wider umbrella term of paganism, and they are different and can intersect like a Venn diagram or not, depending on the person. So polytheism means the belief in multiple gods, and animism means the belief that everything has a soul. So it's these are two things that can go together. Obviously, you can believe that everything has a soul, including objects, for instance, and you can believe in multiple gods. Or there are people that are polytheists, but they are not animists. So they
Mm.
believe in multiple gods, but they don't think that everything as an anima, as a spirit. So these are two belief systems that are definitely found within the larger umbrella of paganism. But one of the great things or interesting things about paganism is that you really find a very wide variety of belief systems and worldviews. You wouldn't find monotheism. You may find monism, for instance, which is different from monotheism and means the belief that everything is ultimately one, as opposed to believing in one and only God, which would be monotheism. But yeah, you definitely find a variety of perceptions and interpretations of the divine. Another thing interesting about paganism, which also we have a chapter in the book about, is the concept of hard versus soft polytheism.
Mm.
Hard polytheism is the belief that gods are ontologically real outside of us, independent of us. They just are there, exist. They have their own characteristics. And soft polytheism is more the concept that deities are archetypes or maybe psychological traits within us or forces of nature. So soft polytheism doesn't see the gods as independent from us, but it sees gods as somewhat dependent on us. So, like for
Mm.
instance, the Greek god Eros could be interpreted as the archetype of the passion that I have inside myself. So when I call upon Eros, I'm calling upon this internal drive as opposed to an external god that exists independent of me. Whereas a hard polytheistic approach would see Eros as a separate entity that functions completely independently from me.
Mm. I've never talked about hard versus soft polytheism on this podcast in 7 years, so I'm really delighted to have that kind of like little individual nugget of information included. Thank you so much. Okay, so you mentioned that pagan religions are growing demographically. What is going on around the world today that, if we were to look at the way that pagan religions are, being practiced around the world, what are some trends that you're seeing as you're paying attention to pagan religions in general?
Trends in terms of
Like
trends related
demographic
to its
growth
growth.
and yeah. What is going on in the world with in modern times?
I think that there's definitely a growth of paganism worldwide. It's just sometimes difficult to pinpoint because, as Vivian Crowley also highlighted in the book and also in a roundtable that we had on my channel, Angela Symposium, it's difficult to trace the growth of paganism just because many pagans wouldn't identify as pagans. But from the point of view of the academic definition that we can give of paganism, they would classify as pagans. So there's also a bit of a mismatch between the emic and the ethic perspective with that. And for the listeners who are not familiar, the emic perspective is the perspective of the practitioners, of the insiders, and the ethic perspective is, which is ETIC, is the perspective of the scholar. So sometimes there is a mismatch between the two because the insider would define things in a different way from how the scholar would define them. So, but it is a religious phenomenon that is growing, and in terms of the trends that I see, I think that in the past there was more of a trend towards communal practice, and perhaps now there's more a trend towards individual practice, probably also because of the internet and the pandemic and the fact that many people um, become friends with people online that perhaps may be at a long distance from them, so you cannot possibly practice with them in real life. Another trend that I've seen is the fact that there's more of a drive towards finding ancestral roots from people. So there's
Mm.
a more of a trend towards folk magic,
Hmm.
whereas in the past, in paganism there was a more of a trend towards a standardized pagan practice, which we could see Wicca would be in a way a representative of that. So you have a specific mold of pagan practice, and different people would give it their own flavor, but you still have that specific mold of pagan practice, of the seasonal festivals, of how the ritual is done, how the ritual is structured. So I think that we're moving more towards something that is more individualistic and also a bit more rooted in the territory,
Hmm.
because pagan traditions like Wicca were very influenced by ceremonial magic and in a way standardized in the way that they would do things. And standardization means, in a way, universalization, which means that regardless of whether you are doing your practice, whether it's in Italy or in the UK or in the US, you kind of are supposed to have the same structure and get the same results. Whereas a practice that is more localized tends to take more into account the very local elements. So it could be the history of the place, it could be the specific astrological situation of the moment in that specific area. So I think that perhaps we are moving more towards that, and also towards an interest in folk magic traditions and in connecting with their ancestors. This is particularly prevalent in North America because of the history of North America and many people feeling like they want to get in touch with their heritage, which
Right.
tends to be outside of
Yeah.
of North America. So that's another trend that I see in North America. Um,
Interesting.
Another thing is probably the ethics. I think that there was a phase in pagan history, where it was probably very important to have the emphasis on the typical Wiccan type of ethics, where it says, "And harm none, do what thou will," which is, but also there's the concept that everything that you do, good or bad, is gonna come back to you threefold. So that kind of ethic has been challenged by contemporary pagans as something that's too simplistic and in a way is too similar to monotheistic religions. So the ethical side has also been challenged, and there are also people that tend to be more, as they would say on social media, hex positive, or acknowledge the fact that even, for instance, when we're talking about the use of magic, that the use of magic is never quite neutral, that even if you do something that is positive in its intent, like for instance, getting a job, you might still, as a result, working within this belief system and framework, you might still, get the job at the expense of somebody else who perhaps need it more, for instance,
Mm.
and you may not be aware of that. So everything that you do is uh, has consequences and could be seen as good and evil, or if we can use those terms, perhaps they are too theological, we could say beneficial or harmful.
Yeah. There's an essay in the book called "Is Paganism a Religion?" and the answer is it depends, which I would often say to my own students whenever we're talking about so many questions involving religion, which would always drive them super crazy. But I'm curious about why it depends, and I'm wondering if you can give me an example of a time when it is a religion and a time when it's not a religion based on that dependent variable, if you will.
Um, so I think that probably Suzanne is more competent to answer that question. So I will tell you a bit more about what she said in the book, and
Sure.
maybe I can also give you my own perspective. So when Suzanne talks about the fact that it depends whether paganism is a religion, it's because many pagans object to the categorization of what they do as religion. So it's a
Mm.
term that is rejected by many pagans, especially when religion is conceived as having a church and creed that is based on Protestant Christian assumptions. Also, Sudan points out that the term religion, as it is currently understood, emerged within European Christian context. At the time, the authority of the state was being distinguished from the authority of the church, and religion was further relegated to the private sphere, which both acted to shield it somewhat from the state scrutiny and to prevent religious leaders from meddling in politics. So, in this sense, applying the term religion to what Hindus, Buddhists, and others do is always going to distort them when taking them out of culture, politics, and so on. And Christianity, as well, as Susan points out, suffers a similar distortion through the conception of religion as something special that is set apart from the rest of society, as it is in cases in law, for instance. So there was the problem of the charity registration in England and Wales, that they have a separate category for religion and religion or belief, which is recognized as a characteristic in the UK's Equality Act and in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. And when the Druid Network registered as a charity for the advancement of religion, many other Druids, including some of its members, thought that this meant that the Druid Network had joined the establishment, and others were adamant that Druidry was not a religion. Um, Before this and also afterwards, the Pagan Federation tried several times to register as religion, but were rejected on each occasion. Primarily because they lacked cohesion, as each member was free to interpret the principles themselves, which for the charity commissioners was simply not a characteristic of a religion, which is interpreted from a Protestant Christian point of view. However, both the Druid Network and the Pagan Federation were eventually admitted as members of the Interfaith Network UK
Mm.
after at first being rejected because it might, they presumed, upset existing members. So this is what Suzanne points out in the chapter. What I think is that despite the origin of the term religion, religion has is a social actor in our society. So personally, I think that paganism is indeed a religion, and when practitioners themselves, when the pagans themselves object to the term religion, they are working with a specific definition that
Mm.
might not be the definition of religion, and perhaps by utilizing the term for themselves, they can help to reframe what religion means, as
Mm.
opposed to just subject themselves and exclude themselves from a social actor that is definitely relevant, even from a social and political and sociological point of view. So my take on that is that the use of the term religion from pagans is something that I would encourage for that, for the reframing of religion, that regardless of how the term started, it is a term that is a big social actor in our world, in our politics, in our society. So it might be more beneficial for pagans to utilize it and help reframing it as opposed to objecting to its use, because they would exclude them from the conversation more. I mean, we are studying paganism in religious studies,
Yeah.
so I mean that tells you already that it is somewhat the fact that it is included and it is studied within religious studies already makes it relevant. So it is within the realm of religion. So I think that by using the term pagans would help reframe a term that has been for too long associated only with three specific religions.
That is such an awesome point too, and a really interesting way of explaining it, because there's so many benefits that pagan groups could possibly get in society because of the ways that it's like built into, things like fundraising and tax stuff like that. And
Exactly.
there's so much, and it's just such a web that goes out in so many different directions. Something else that caught my eye in the book is your chapter on the pentacle symbol, which like for years and years I was like growing up like listening to like heavy metal and hardcore and punk rock and stuff like that, and you'd see these like pentacle symbols like painted on like band
You have good
t-shirts.
taste.
Thank you very much. And you'd see it on like band T-shirts and like at backdrops at concerts, and it's something that would like make parents freak out when their kid had a band or an album or a CD that had that symbol on it. So I loved this chapter, and so I'm wondering if you can just tell a little bit about the real story behind the pentacle symbol that you tell in the book.
So the pentacle is often used by pagans as a symbol of identification. So to say, I'm a pagan, I wear a pentacle. The pentacle is, for those who are not familiar, is a five-pointed star enclosed within a circle. So that distinguishes from the pentagram, which is just the star. And it is often referred to as pentagram when the circle is absent, as I mentioned. And throughout history, the pentacle has been adopted by various cultures and religious traditions, including Pythagorean and Neoplatonic philosophy, medieval Christian mysticism, and modern Western esotericism. Within the context of contemporary paganism, the pentacle is most commonly associated with Wicca, but the symbol is also used by other pagan traditions and is often seen as a general emblem of pagan spirituality. The 5 points of the pentacle represent the five elements: air, earth, fire, water, and the top one is the spirit, which are fundamental to many pagan belief systems. These elements are seen as the building blocks of the universe that are often associated with various gods, goddesses, and other spiritual beings. The circle that surrounds the star symbolizes the interconnectedness of these elements and also the cyclical nature of life, that highlights the importance of balance and harmony within the natural world and the individual's spiritual journey. And in addition to its elemental association, the pentacle also carries various other meanings within paganism. For example, some practitioners interpret the 5 points as representing the stages of human life: birth, adolescence, adulthood, old age, and death, or the five senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. The pentacle also can symbolize the unity of the microcosm, the individual or human realm, and the macrocosm, the divine or cosmic realm, which reflects the belief in the interconnectedness of all aspects of existence. The pentacle is often used in pagan rituals and ceremonies, particularly in Wiccan practice. It may be inscribed on ritual tools such as the altar or chalice, or worn as a pendant or ring for protection and spiritual guidance. During rituals, the pentacle may be employed to invoke the elements, consecrate sacred space, or direct energy for healing, divination, and other magical practices. But yeah, also I guess the final note is that it's important to note that the pentacle, despite its association with paganism and Wicca, as a sometimes being mistakenly linked to Satanism and other forms of dark magic. The inverted pentacle, which some satanic groups have appropriated as a symbol of defiance against conventional religious authority, is largely to blame for this misconception. However, within the pagan context, the pentacle is generally viewed as a positive and life affirming symbol that represents harmony, balance, and spiritual growth.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully, some misconceptions out there can get cleared up a little bit about what it means and the history behind it and the story and what each of the points means. Very cool. Okay, so this book is so much more than what you and I have been able to talk about today. There are so many contributors. The essay variety is immense and tremendous. What a fun book. Tell me a little bit about what was fun for you about putting this together, because I'm sure it was very hard work, but it's got to be just so rewarding to see something so cool out into the world. Tell me what you enjoyed about the process.
I think that I enjoyed putting together the questions, sort of boiling all the questions down to the ones that we selected, and also the interaction with the contributors, and the book launch and the fact and seeing some of the contributors live, so that we could meet up in person. So I think the whole process was pretty straightforward and pretty pleasant. Working with Suzanne was great. So I think the whole process was great, and reading the contributions from all of our colleagues was fantastic as well. It kind of gives you different perspectives and different insights on things that you may not have thought about. So I think that the learning journey and the learning opportunity is definitely one of the most exciting things.
What projects are you hoping to accomplish in the next, like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years? Do you have any really cool stuff that you're kind of working on along the way now for the future?
In my personal career, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yes, I'm working on publishing more books. I already have two books out. Well, this one that that we talked about, and one with Brill, which is Italian Witchcraft and Shamanism, the result of my PhD. But now I want to start publishing with commercial publishers, because even though I really like working with academic publishers, I think that um, they don't have the wider outreach that I'm hoping to get. So I suppose that I want to start mixing my publications between academic publications and commercial publications, so that they can get a wider outreach. So I'll be working on books for more commercial publishers, on still on topics in esotericism, and still with an academic lens, but a bit more accessible and easier to find for people that want to get knowledge and education on these topics. So I think that my main concern at the moment is outreach. So not just doing my own research, which obviously is important and very exciting, but also the public outreach is definitely one of the key things that I have in terms of my project for the future.
Fabulous. Where would you direct people's attention if they want to follow along with what you got going on?
Oh, definitely people can follow me on my social media platforms. They can find me under either Angela Symposium or Dr. Angela Puca. And I also have a website, drangelapuca.com, should be drangelapuca.com. So you can find my website and there's also a contact form if people want to reach out to me. And yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out my YouTube channel because there's a lot of resources and also interviews to other academics and also a roundtable on this book with the other contributors and with Suzanne.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Angela Puca, co-editor of Pagan Religions in 5 Minutes, of which you contributed numerous chapters to the book yourself, um, co-edited with Suzanne Owen, and released by Equinox. Thank you so much for joining me and chatting about the book and this wonderful collection. I've loved reading it, and this conversation today. I've learned so much in such a short period of time. So thank you so much for being here and hanging out.
Thank you so much, Greg, for inviting me. It was a pleasure.